In 2023, I transferred to a Christian university after I got in my associate's degree to get my bachelor's degree. In the very beginning of the semester, there was some kind of event for incoming students that I went to with my roommate at the time. She and I were walking through the booths when a pastor of a local church approached me and my friend. He asked us what we were studying at university. My friend answered that she was studying graphic design, and she was met with excitement and praise. He turned to me. I say, I'm studying psychology. And his face dropped. He put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, be careful with that. People just need God and prayer. He hands us a pamphlet for his church, which I promptly threw in the trash as soon as I was out of his sight. But this wasn't my first encounter with that kind of attitude from Christians about my desire to study psychology. My story is anecdotal, but illustrates a bigger issue seen in churches. The overspiritualization of mental illness drives people away from the church. Hello everyone, I'm Arya, and here we discuss religion, psychology, and other social sciences. If that's something that interests you, please consider subscribing. There is some construction happening in the apartment above me, so apologies for that. And also, I swear every dog in the neighborhood is barking, but hopefully that my microphone doesn't pick that up. So if it does, I apologize. If you leave a comment on this video, please remember to be respectful and kind to others, okay? So, today's topic is the over-spiritualization of mental health in the church and how I think that it drives people away from the church. So many Christians still hang on to the view of mental illness as a punishment for sin, or that it's caused by sin. This general view seems to be slowly changing, but I don't think it's changing fast enough. At this point, the majority of Christians have accepted that medical intervention and healthcare are acceptable, and that injuries and physical illness are not caused by the individual's sin. Obviously, there's some Christians who still don't think that, but I would think that the majority of Christians think that medical intervention is okay. So, when someone is diagnosed with cancer, for example, most Christians' reactions would be to have the person seek medical treatment and not proclaim that the cancer patient has some sort of unresolved sin. However, when someone is suffering from, say, generalized anxiety disorder, I think too many Christians' reactions are to say that that person is only lacking faith and trust in God. In my opinion, the idea that mental health is caused by a lack of faith falls into the realm of prosperity gospel. This is the idea that if one lives in accordance with God, that the person will prosper and enjoy good health. Personally, I grew up Reformed Protestant, and in most Protestant circles, prosperity gospel is seen as a false teaching. Yet when it comes to mental health, I believe that many Christians who would condemn prosperity gospel have the notion that strong trust in God prevents mental illness. I think there's a strong argument for this being unbiblical. Throughout the Bible, there are many instances of God's faithful followers suffering. One obvious example, of course, is the book of Job. Even Jesus himself experienced intense anxiety and fear in the Garden of Gethsemane. Throughout history, there have been many examples of martyrs who suffered and died for the faith. There is no reason for modern Christians to think that trusting and praying to God dictates the hand we are dealt in life. Blaming the individual's spiritual state ignores the factual causes of mental illness and disabilities. Mental illness has biological, environmental, and social causes. And this isn't up for debate. I know there are psychologists out there who think mental illness can be partly a spiritual issue, but you aren't going to find a credible psychologist who thinks that the only cause of mental illness is a spiritual one. When the world recognizes that mental illness has biological, environmental, and social causes, but the church does not, those who are struggling may turn away from the church and seek help from the world. This is counter to the goal of the church. Christians struggling with mental illness often seek help first from their Christian peers and their pastors. I think that this shouldn't be the norm, but it is. I would encourage Christians who are struggling with anything that isn't purely theological or spiritual to seek help in more appropriate areas. If you had a medical condition, you wouldn't go to your pastor first, I would hope. You would go to the doctor. I think that people should treat mental health and relationship problems in a similar fashion. However, people do go to their pastors and Christian peers for help with mental illness. If they're only met with criticism and judgment, this may lead them to being pushed away due to the shame put on them for something that they should not feel ashamed for. Something I and many of my friends and family who struggle with mental illness have heard from the church is that only non-believers suffer from mental illness and are unhappy. I think people get this idea from the fact that they believe that you can only find true joy and peace in the Lord. You can believe this and not say that to somebody who's suffering with mental illness. And I think you can believe it and still be someone who suffers from mental illness and seek help for it. Saying that only people who aren't putting all their faith in God suffer from mental illness is harmful. This narrative only perpetuates cognitive distortions of worthlessness. It's also simply untrue. There are many people who are not Christian who are happy and not mentally ill. And on the flip side, there are many Christians who suffer from mental illness. So that just kind of proves their point wrong. Just like how anyone can catch a cold or break a leg, mental illness can befall believers and non-believers alike. If you believe that we live in a fallen world, this should not be an issue. Christians can have mental illness and it does not reflect their spiritual state. Relating back to my story of when I started college, I think there are still many Christians who fear the entire field of psychology. Psychology has a reputation for being anti-religion, and is there some validity in that? I mean, honestly, yeah. I think psychology can show religions and religious practices to be abusive or psychologically harmful. It can take the magic out of religious experiences, and it can bring up hard questions about free will and agency. All these things could cause a religious person to question their faith, or it could make a non-religious person be against certain religious practices. But I don't think that's a problem for psychology. I think that's an issue for religion. If your religion is true, it should be able to withstand scrutiny. If the only way you can keep your faith is to be willfully ignorant, your beliefs are flimsy. And while psychology could cause someone to question their beliefs, I don't think that necessarily means that they'll deconvert. Obviously, because I went to a Christian university, all my psychology professors were Christian. Most of my classmates were also Christian. They didn't see a conflict between science and their religion. In fact, some people saw it as evidence that their beliefs were right. They saw psychology as supporting Christianity. Also, there are benefits to religion and spirituality, and I actually think that atheists who reject and ridicule any form of spirituality are actually doing themselves and others a disservice by denying this. Spirituality is built into us because human evolution has been influenced by it for millennia. By rejecting every spiritual practice, you're honestly rejecting a part of yourself and a part of the human experience, and you only get one chance to live that human experience, so why would you do that to yourself? So I believe that religious people should not be scared of psychology, because a true religion should be consistent with reality, and psychology can be compatible with religious beliefs. So if you're a religious person and you are fearful of psychology, I do not think that it's a good idea to let that fear dictate your life, because faith over fear. You can keep your religion and you can study the sciences. And I think if you can't, then maybe you do need to reevaluate your beliefs. That doesn't mean you need to deconvert. It just means maybe something isn't lining up anymore. So faith and prayer cannot fix mental illness, just as they cannot fix diabetes, influenza, or a broken wrist. There are positive psychological benefits to prayer, but no amount of mindfulness practices can fix a clinical chemical imbalance in your brain. I think it's in everyone's best interest if Christian attitudes towards those who are suffering are welcoming and grounded in current psychological understandings. Romans 12:15 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep." Coming alongside those who are suffering and not making them feel guilt or shame is important, especially if you are a Christian who believes you are to be an image bearer of Christ. Okay, so those are my thoughts on the overspiritualization of mental health and how it can drive people away from the church. So if you are a Christian who cares about keeping Christians in the flock, let me know if you agree or if you have other thoughts. And if you aren't a Christian, maybe you're one of those atheists who just hate spirituality, also let me know your thought. Whoa. Also let me know your thoughts. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.